because ChatGPT, it's the argument is potentially that it can take over search engines. Don't use a search engine, just use a language model like ChatGPT to do it. And why not? Thing is, they can be wrong. They can have misinformation. Also, can the internet, so can search engines. But it's just making sure that potentially there are safeguards in place. And I think that's where these things are going, to make sure that there are safeguards that can be managed and there is a level of accountability that can be demonstrated to make them work properly.
I heard a lot about restricting these. You are used to GDPR and InfoSec first approach within businesses. Is that what you would recommend, that a business needs to really focus on those items before they even think about rolling out GDP, ChatGPT within their environments?
Almost all companies now, they're all tech connected. A lot of their info is all cloud-based. And the thing with ChatGPT, because part of the problem is that you may have some great intellectual property, but you may use it to reword an article you've written about it or a document. What's to say that ChatGPT is not using that information to build its own database and then sharing your intellectual property? And there's been a lot of discussion on the artwork ones, where they develop fantastic kind of pictures in different styles, different artists. And those artists, is their style their intellectual property? And now the computer is copying it. Is that fair? Is that right? Should it be doing that? So it's how should that be managed? So suddenly who is the owner of copyright? Who is the owner of intellectual property? And should it be shared?
Well, this is going to keep lawyers busy for years, and they're going to use a lot of technologies in order to track down this intellectual property theft. And I think that is a very interesting prospect in itself. And with cybersecurity, it's the same, isn't it? When hackers get better at hacking, technology improves, and it's the same. It's just different sides of the coin, of course. So hugely interesting, thought-provoking concepts to think about.
And kind of going on the other side of the coin is that they're learning models. They learn. So if you feed them with enough information, you can get them to learn the wrong thing. Is that a new concept? Absolutely not. There were many examples. I'm going to quote during the Second World War, where I think, especially in the UK, we had blow-up tanks and wooden kind of armaments all over the country. So when pictures were taken, it looked like we had a massive tank advance, somewhere in the country being stored, and all that information was disinformation used to advantage. And you can do, I know at the moment, I don't know if it's still happening, but you can do that with some of these models. You can influence them. They are susceptible to bias. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Same concepts, but at a much faster rate and to be done locally. You don't need anything really clever to do this.
I mean, it's certainly a minefield in these areas. And, as the tech companies ramp up their efforts to create something amazing, then obviously bad actors and people will try to propagate bad information, creating deep fakes and all these kind of things. It's kind of a little bit worrying, I must admit, to be honest. But I think we all need to take responsibility around these things.
And I think there's a couple of things there that just kind of pointed out. There is going to be, and I don't think it's in place yet, they are looking at how you regulate AI for these very purposes. But we're already seeing this in social media for a long time. Disinformation on social media is very, very widespread.
I mean, a lot of businesses must be very worried right now, especially with their competitors taking on these AI technologies at such a rapid rate. So, it must be very worrying. What are businesses actually doing at the moment, apart from some perhaps burying their heads in the sand?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think burying your head in the sand is obviously one strategy, but sooner or later it's probably not going to work. And it's new technology. You don't really want to be left behind. I think that's a mistake to ignore it. It's how can you manage it? How can you put a level of control in place? I think that's just as important. I think it's easy to say, yeah, our company's banned it, but you may pay the price for that further down the line when your competitors are using it and getting better results and leveraging, staff capability and performance. There are things that can be done. I think we're going to talk about them later, but it's really kind of understanding that it probably shouldn't be stopped, but it should be controlled and monitored. That's for sure.
As per usual, governments are kind of getting involved with these sorts of things, and it's a challenging situation for them, and they're going to need to really learn about how these things work very, very quickly in order to put the right regulations in place. But in the meantime, businesses are using, these sorts of technologies that kind of layer in over the top. Do you think they're a really good kind of way to sort of prevent potential damage from these sorts of things?
Where things are probably heading, the guardrail concept, where the guardrails can be overlaid on these models, large language models, and provide the transparency, fairness, privacy, security, and accountability that's required.